Hello everyone. Fat Quarter Shop is doing a Christmas mystery sew along. They do this every year, I believe. And I wasn't going to do it, but I saw some of the pictures and I just couldn't resist. So I dug through my stash. You're supposed to use a layer cake and yardage for this, but I don't have really any of that. The only yardage that I have is this blue one. It has like a snowflakes pattern on it. I figured this would be good for the background. And it was the only piece that I had that was big enough to do the background. And I didn't have layer cakes, so I just figured I would use that back quarter bundle that I got from Fat Quarter Shop. I figured it would work. And you're supposed to use a 3/4 yard for the tree portion of this. Again, I didn't have enough yardage for that, so I was just like, okay, well, there's 3 green fat quarters in here, so why not just use that? Because that's 3/4 yard, right? My tree will just be different colors, but I figured why not? It would give it a nice little scrappy look and go with that. And then some of the other fabrics that I have here, I will just use for the backgrounds. But you do also need an accent green for your tree, so I pulled these two out of my stash. I'm not sure which one I'll use yet. I'll figure that out when I get to that point and see which one goes the best with it. But yeah, so I figured I would show you how I'm going to put this together. All right, so I have all my pieces cut out as per the pattern. I'm not going to give you any of the measurements, but I will leave a link to this pattern in the description box below. This piece here is shorter than what it says on the pattern, but I didn't have yardage, so I'm just going to try to make it work with this. I might have to add a piece, but that's fine. I'll do that if I need to. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to draw a diagonal line on all of our fabric G's. This is going to be for the Flying Geese units that we need to make. Normally I would make mine 4 at a time just to save some fabric. But these, I needed 5 of them, and it was just like, well, if I have to make one, then I'll just make them all like that. And I didn't really feel like doing any math to figure out how big I needed to cut my pieces for 4 at a time, so I just did it like this. So I'm taking all of my fabric Ds, and I'm going to be placing them on my design board here, and then just this way I can keep everything organized, because I'm going to go to the sewing machine and, of course, chain stitch wherever I can. So I'm just going to be laying all my pieces on there the way that I need to sew them on there so that I don't get mixed up. Let me know in the comments if you're doing this sew along with Fat Quarter Shop as well. And if you are, I'd love to see the pictures. You can always join my Facebook group. The link is in the description box below. This is my first time doing this sew along with Fat Quarter Shop for the Christmas one. But I'm actually really excited for this because I have a pretty good idea of what this quilt is going to look like once it's done, because the bottom part kind of gives it away. It looks like the bottom of a tree with some gifts underneath it to me. All right, I have sewed the little squares onto the one side, and I'm going to take my little ruler here and I'm going to cut off the extra fabric there. I did take it to the ironing board already, and I double checked to make sure that everything was lining up before I pressed it, and it was all good. So now I'm just going to line my 1/4 inch line up with my stitch line and cut off the extra fabric. It's not a lot of waste because these are tiny little ones. If I'm making like bigger Flying Geese units or a whole bunch of them, I will use the no waste or the 4 at a time. I feel like it goes faster. If you don't know how to do that, I do have a video on that, so I will leave that in the description box down below if you're interested, and you can check that out after this one. All right, once I've trimmed that all off, I'm just going to lay them out on my design board again and get my fabric G squares, the ones that I have left over, and put them in the position that I need to sew them on, and then head over to the sewing machine and do the same thing to this side. So I'm just going to trim off all of my extra corners here, and then once I'm done that, I'm going to be squaring up my Flying Geese units. It is a very good idea to square up after every step, and that's what one of the things that I love about Fat Quarter Shop patterns is it shows you what each unit is supposed to measure, and if you can square up in between or like while you're working on it, everything's going to line up so much better in the end. So take the time to do this. I think it really makes a big difference. It makes things look a lot better. So now I'm going to be taking 3 of my Flying Geese units and putting them on a pile, and then the other 2 will be on a separate pile. And 3 of them will be getting fabrics E sewn on each side, and then the other 2 will be getting fabrics F sewn on each side. So I'm just going to lay them out on my design board here and head over to the sewing machine. I'm going to be chain stitching here. I love chain stitching. I feel like it saves a lot of thread and a lot of time. All right, we're slowly getting there, but we are going to get this done soon. This is what you should have now. You should have 3 that are a little bit bigger than the other 2. And make sure that you square these up because I forgot to do it here, and then later on when I tried to sew it together, I had to come back and square it up first. But now we're going to need to take fabrics B, and we're going to be adding those to the 3 of the bigger ones. So again, I'll be pulling up my design board and laying everything on there because I'm going to be chain stitching. So you're just going to lay these right sides together like this so that when you sew them, you're going to have a unit that looks like that. But I'm going to show you a little bit of tip here that I do because when I take my units, I'm going to take a piece like this, move this out of the way, and then I'm going to take this one and lay it upside down like this. That way I can see exactly where my points are, and I can keep an eye out on my seams because you can't really see it on the camera here because I'm using coordinating thread. But this way I can kind of make sure that I don't cut off my points because I don't want to do that. All right, once you have that done, we are ready to start assembling our little presents. My kids asked me what I was making, and I told them I was sewing a Christmas quilt, and they got all excited that it was Christmas time. Boy, were they disappointed when I told them it wasn't, and it was a long wait yet. One little tip too, if you're using directional fabric, make sure that you're placing it the right way. I'm just making a nice little pile here so that I can just flip it down like this and sew it right sides together. And I'm actually going to, since I'm going to the sewing machine anyway, take as much with me as I can. And the fabrics that I use for the smaller gifts, those are fabrics I, but I'm going to be taking fabrics H as well. These are for the taller gifts. And I'll just lay them all on my design board, and that way I can take them over to the sewing machine and then just get as much done at once because I don't like getting up and going back and forth all the time. I like to do as much as I can at each station in my sewing room as I can. So if I'm cutting, I like to batch cut, and if I'm sewing, batch sew. The same thing with pressing. Sorry if you can see kid in the background there. I was babysitting and my niece wanted to watch me sew. So now that I have those all done, I am ready to assemble this row. I believe this is called a row quilt. I think I heard someone say that. It's my first time doing one of those, but I think it's going to look very cute and interesting. I'm kind of excited to see what it's going to look like. So here I'm just deciding on the layout and which way I want to place my gifts, if I want to move them around. And then I'm going to take these last two and these first two, and I'm just going to lay them together the way I want to sew them together. And normally I wouldn't pin or clip, but I will be clipping here because I want to keep it in place and I want to make sure that I'm sewing them on the right side and I don't accidentally shift it and sew it on the wrong side. And then once I've sewn those together, I'm just going to sew that middle piece in and that row will be done. All right, so the next one we're supposed to be putting a long strip there on the top. Well, I didn't have yardage, like I said. I was just cutting from a fat quarter, and obviously this is longer than what a fat quarter is. So my piece is a bit short. Now I have options here. I could just cut another piece from my fat quarter because I do have enough fabric and then just add it, but then I'm going to have a seam there. So I figured, well, I got to snowball these corners anyway because I looked at the pattern and that's what I need to do. So I'm going to see if I can get away with not sewing another piece on there and just doing it like this. So to do that, I am going to be taking my top piece here and just folding it in half and giving it a little bit of a finger press just to kind of give me a crease so that I know where my center point is. And then I'll just do the same thing to my bottom piece. I'm hoping this is going to work because if it doesn't work, then I got to unpick it and I don't want to unpick it. So I'm just going to use my crease marks and then line up my center points here, and I'm just going to clip it into place and just, and if you're doing this too, try not to stretch it or pull it or anything like that. I'm just going to lay it nice and flat and take it over to the sewing machine and sew it down, and I'm going to give it a good press, and yes, it's going to look a little bit weird, but I have hope that this is going to work. All right, as you can see, it looks a little bit weird, but I figured whatever, we're going to see if this is going to hold up. So I'm just going to lay this down on here. And normally you would line up your corner too, but since I don't have a corner here, I'm just going to be lining up those two edges. And if they're lined up, it should be squared and good to go. That's my logic here. So I'm just going to try to make sure that I'm getting it really nice and even because I don't want it to turn out crooked. And yes, I will be pinning here because I really don't want this to move. So, and then here I was like, wait, did I have enough? But yeah, I do have enough fabric. And since we're cutting that off anyway, there was really no point in me adding fabric to that because then I was just wasting more fabric because where am I going to use that? I don't know. And then I'm just going to do the exact same thing to the other side. I'm going to take that square and pin it in place too. Just making sure that the lines that I've drawn are going in the right direction. We want them to go from outside corner to outside corner or like outer edge. All right, now that I've sewn those on, I'm just going to flip this up and trim off that extra. I did already iron this as well. I just like giving it a good press before I cut it. But see, I had plenty of room there and I didn't have to waste any extra fabric or anything like that. You could just use your scissors here and just do a rough cut, but I'm going to take my ruler and then line up my 1/4 inch line with my stitch line and then just cut it with my rotary cutter. That blue piece I'm going to keep in case I need a small background piece somewhere else. You never know, right? All right, week 1 is all done and I am ready to move on to week 2. And since I'm behind, I'm going to quickly do that one in this video as well. I have all my pieces cut out and labeled with my alphabets so I don't get anything mixed up. So let's get started with week 2. So I read through my pattern and I need to start with half square triangles for my pinwheel blocks. And according to the pattern, you should be doing the 2 at a time method, but I'm going to do the 4 at a time and the 8 at a time just to make it go a little bit faster. And that's just the way I like making my half square triangles. I do have videos on both of those, which I will leave in the description box below. So I need to make 1 pinwheel with the tree fabric and then 2 pinwheels with the tree accent fabric. So I'm just going to do that. I won't film all of that. If you want to know how to make them this method, I will, like I said, I will leave the videos linked down below. And if you're interested in any of the tools that you see me using in my videos, I usually try to link everything in the description box down below. So if you want to check those out, feel free to do so. I couldn't go back to quilting without my rotating cutting mat or this half square triangle trimming ruler. It's just the best in my opinion. So once I have all my pieces trimmed up, then it's time to assemble my pinwheel blocks. And anybody else always have to rotate their little blocks around 100 times before they actually get the pinwheel design. I don't know why. I've made these so many times, you'd think I know how to lay them together, but I struggle with it every time. And it was at this point where I started second guessing my fabric choices, but because I wasn't buying anything, just using for my stash, I had very limited fabrics to pick from, so I'm just going to keep going and hope that it works out. So I have my pinwheel blocks all made and they are trimmed up to the size that they need to be. So once we have done that, I'm going to take my two fabric C pieces and these will need to be sewn on either side of that one pinwheel. And since I know how they need to go together, I'm just going to toss them on my design board there. And then for my next two pinwheels, I need to take fabric K and that one will go in between the two. And then fabric L has two pieces and that will go on either end. So I'll just sew those on and I'll show you what it looks like. I'm trying to keep this video a little bit shorter. I didn't want to make it too terribly long. But anyways, here are these two strips. And again, seriously starting to question my fabric choices. And then that's where I realized that I had switched two of my pinwheel pieces around. So that's not lining up the way I wanted. But whatever, it is what it is. And I'm just going to keep going. So now we need to make little four patches. And according to the pattern, you need to cut a whole bunch of little squares. And I didn't want to work with a bunch of little squares. So I just cut two strips the width of my fat quarter from each fabric that I needed. And then I'm just going to sew these together in a strip unit. And I find it just a lot easier to do four patches like this, especially if it's small pieces. I sewed it with a 1/4 inch seam and I pressed it to the dark side. I'm going to be cutting them the same width that you cut your strip at. So I don't know if I can give measurements away. It is a free pattern, but I don't want to say anything because I don't want to get in trouble. I will leave the links to all the patterns down below. But this way, once you have them cut like this, they nest together perfectly. So I'm just going to cut all the pieces that I need. And then I will go and sew those together and come back and show you what the next step is in this pattern. All right, it is time to assemble our popcorn roll garland or whatever you want to call it. I don't know. I think that's what they were referring to. So we need fabrics E for on each end. And then we're just going to place our little four patches down, but it's going to be a fabric E and then a four patch. And then we're going to be taking fabrics D and just placing one of those there and then another four patch and then another fabric D. We'll just follow the pattern. It is very easy to follow and I think it's very beginner friendly. I at least find that Backwater Shop's patterns are very easy to follow. But with these four patches, you do need to make sure that you are putting them in the correct orientation because it is gonna, or it's supposed to look like a garland when it's all put together with the pinwheels. And so you just need to look at your pattern and make sure that you're doing it correctly. I printed mine in black and white, but you can still see that the low volume ones are supposed to go in a certain direction. So just make sure that you keep an eye out on that and you don't accidentally get them mixed up. So what I did is I figured out how I wanted to lay them out and then I clipped them together and I went over to the sewing machine and I did bring my pattern with me. That way I could refer to it and make sure that I didn't end up putting it together the wrong way. And I moved my ironing station a little bit closer so I can just turn around and do it there. And then I laid it back down on my table and double checked with my pattern because I said I didn't want to mess this up. I had already made a mistake and I didn't want to make any more because I didn't want to end up having to unpick it. And then after this one, we are ready to start assembling our rows. So again, referring to our pattern and going on to the next page to see what we need to do. So we're going to start with the two pinwheels, which is our accent part, and then we're going to sew our popcorn row on there. And this one is where we need to make sure that we're nesting our seams here properly. And the pattern does tell you which direction to iron or press so that everything will nest. So make sure you're following that. And then I'm going to take fabric G, and this one is going to go on the top of that one. Yeah, that single pinwheel. And I'm just going to pin these together and then take them over to the sewing machine and sew them at the same time and then sew those two units together as well. And like I said, pattern is very easy to follow. Just refer to that. I just wanted to do a little quick sew with me video. This is my first time doing mystery quilt along and I'm a little nervous about how it's going to look, but at the same time excited. All right, and then once we've sewn all those rows together, we are going to have to do some sew clips again, just like we did on the first, on week 1. So for the next step, we need to take fabrics A and draw a diagonal line on the back of each one. That's going to be our sewing guide for when we do our sew and flips. I'm using a heat erase pen here, but you could use a pencil or any other marking tool. It's in the wrong side of the fabric. It's backside. Nobody's ever going to see it. And I'm going to make sure that I'm pinning these in place because I don't want them to move around while I'm sewing. I want this to look as nice and neat as possible. All right, once we've sewn those on, we're just going to cut off that extra fabric. You can use your scissors here or a ruler and a rotary cutter like I am. Sorry, it's late and apparently talking doesn't want to work for me anymore. All right, the last step for this week 2 pattern is taking fabrics B and sewing them on either side of our unit here. So I'm just going to go over and do that and then I'll show you what both of them look like. So I did make a little boo-boo there and kind of cut off that one square. And like I said before, that one pinwheel is not in the correct orientation either. It's two minor things. I am not going to stress out about it. I'm just going to leave it the way it is and go with the flow. It is what it is. Well, anyways, thanks for hanging out with me while I sew, and I hope you enjoyed this. Thank you so much for stopping by and watching. And let me know in the comments if you're making this quilt as well.